Welcome, everyone. I'm Stephanie Hoops, National Director of United for Alice. And if you don't know us, United for Alice is a driver of innovation, research, and action around Alice, asset limited, income constrained, employed. Our measures capture the mismatch between the cost of household basics and what jobs pay. Our research provides a comprehensive, unbiased picture of financial hardship. Harnessing this data and research, we work with partners to advocate and collaborate on solutions that promote financial stability at the local, state, and national level. This is the first of our three-part Alice in Focus series. We're delighted to launch with a focus on children. So when you try something new, you never quite know how it's going to turn out. But with almost 500 people on the webinar today, we know we're on to something. And we hope that you'll fill out the pop-up poll that tells us what region of the US you're from. We take this turnout as an indicator of not only the quality of the Alice research, but the level of concern for children across the country today. As a collaborative project, there are many contributors who made our research both rigorous and accessible. So in addition to the amazing research team at United for Alice, we benefited from two committees of external experts. The Alice in Focus National Leadership Committee for Children is comprised of leaders in the field of advocacy and action for children. You'll hear from a few of them in our panel in a few moments, but we want to thank you all. In addition, the Alice in Focus National Research Advisory Committee for Children is composed of research experts drawn from our partner states. Some are new to United for Alice, but many have served for years. In total, 41 Research Advisory Committee members from 18 states participated. Thank you all. Now let's dig into the findings. Oops, I want to give these guys a little bit more airtime. Okay, now let's dig into the findings. Our research reveals that there's a reason for concern. Across the US, 16% of children were in poverty in 2019. Another 33% were Alice. Adding poverty and Alice together, in total, 36 million, nearly half of children lived in families that struggled to meet their basic needs going into the pandemic. This is staggering. For many, it's a surprise. But for those working in the space, they have confirmed that this is what they see, and they appreciate having the solid data to back it up. Another area of concern is from a race equity perspective. While Alice spans all communities, age groups, and races across the US, households of color are disproportionately Alice, a result of systemic barriers that limit their access to resources and opportunities. The Alice in Focus research reveals that 70% of Black children and 68% of Hispanic children were living in households that were either Alice or poverty in 2019, compared to 36% of white children. A key driver of financial stability for children is the employment status of their parents. But having working parents or guardians doesn't guarantee financial stability. Even in households with two working adults, 28% of children across the US were below the Alice threshold. When only one of the two adults worked, the rate increased to 61%. And children living with a single parent, even when that parent was working, were even more likely to be below the Alice threshold at 73%. And when you look at specific jobs, these rates are not surprising. For example, 79% of children with an adult working as a cashier, earning a median hourly wage of $11.37, were below the Alice threshold in 2019. Living in households unable to afford the basics has short-term consequences for well-being, but also long-term consequences for mental health, access to higher education, and good jobs. Our findings show that Alice children were more likely to live in rental housing and to be rent burdened. Children and families below the ALICE threshold are enrolled in preschool at lower rates. And I note that there is a wide variation across states in these enrollment rates. In addition, most families have access to some internet at home, but children and families below the ALICE threshold were less likely to have high-speed internet, which, as we know, became essential during the pandemic. There were also significant differences here by race and ethnicity and by location. And finally, we know that ALICE families often earn too much to qualify for public assistance. Notably, we found that more than 23 million children in the US were living in struggling households, but did not access SNAP. Given that ALICE children were already living in struggling households before COVID-19, the pandemic has made life that much harder for these children and their families. The focus briefs conclude with data from the Census Household Pulse surveys that builds on our recent report, The Pandemic Divide. And some of the findings that stand out include households below the ALICE threshold with children were more likely to be concerned about making their rent or mortgage payment on time. Throughout the pandemic, ALICE families also struggled to afford food. In fact, 40% of families below the ALICE threshold reported in the fall of 2021 that their children sometimes or often did not have enough food to eat. Children below the ALICE threshold were less likely to have had preventative health care, and the pandemic disrupted student learning for the past 2 years. We see some initial differences by household income and expect to see more as the pandemic progresses. All right, so that's a lot of information. There's even more. How can you access this great data? Check out our website, unitedforalice.org/focuschildren. And for those of you who can stay for a few minutes after the panel concludes, we're offering a tour of the website where you can find the national and state briefs and use the interactive online dashboard to explore data on children by geography, race, age, disability status, living arrangements, and a lot more. As we move into the panel, we'd like to know a little bit more about you through the pop-up poll. If you could invest in one area, which do you think would have the biggest impact for ALICE children? So the poll will pop up and you can tell us what it's, I know it's going to be hard to choose. And now for our panel. The goal for our research is always to inform meaningful change. Next, we'll hear from our panelists how they plan to do this. And as you listen to the interesting discussion, please use the Q&A for the panelists. We're going to disable the chat, but we've saved about 20 minutes at the end of the presentation for your questions. So now I'd like to introduce our moderator, Bob Atkins, who will then introduce the panelists. Bob is the Interim Dean of Faculty of Arts and Sciences at Rutgers Camden and formerly the Director of the New Jersey Health Initiative. Bob has long been a champion for ALICE and most recently served on or is still serving on our Advisory Council for United in Care, which is United Way of Northern New Jersey's pilot to make quality childcare more affordable for ALICE families and more sustainable for childcare providers. Bob, turning over to you.
Thanks, Stephanie. Good afternoon, everyone. I'm delighted to be here. This is a really important discussion, really timely discussion. And for me, it really resonates for at least 3 reasons. And before I introduce the panel, I'd like to just go over those really briefly. The first is my first job at a nursing school. I came right here to the city of Camden and began working as a school nurse. Working with middle schoolers, 5th, 6th, 7th, and 8th, I know that I served a lot of kids in ALICE households. Didn't have a term to describe it, but I think when you look at ALICE, it really gives us a deeper understanding to understand what is happening in the lives of children and their families. And as we really aspire to build healthier, more equitable, more resilient communities, it's really important to have this kind of understanding. And as a funder and a scholar, I know our communities need to be informed now more than ever coming out of the pandemic. We know the importance of having timely information. We know that local journalism has imploded in many of our communities, especially in those that are non-metropolitan and rural. And it's really going to be important to be able to kind of share information, but also we're going to need data tools. The Robert Wood Johnson Foundation, which I had the pleasure and privilege of serving for several years, has really pushed these kinds of data tools and resources like county roadmaps, city health dashboard. And I think Alice is going to be a great complement to what we're already understanding around that. Because what we really need to do is make the invisible visible. And Alice really helps us to do that. And finally, as a citizen, I'm coming out of the pandemic, the racial and social justice protests that we've had. Our democracy is feeling the weight and it's feeling a little bit fragile. And as we think about equity and social mobility, Alice is going to be really important for us to understand kind of who are we missing, who's getting left out, who is in our blind spot. And Alice is really going to help to shed some really important light. So I'm delighted to be here. I really can't wait to get going this panel. So I will first kick it off with Stephanie Ettinger de Cuba, the Executive Director of Children's HealthWatch. Stephanie, there you are. Hi.
Hi there.
Hi. Thanks for joining us. Nice to meet you.
Great to be here. Yeah, it's great to be here.
Stephanie, what data points stand out for you as you look at this, and how will you use this data in your work?
Yeah, I mean, I think there are a lot of really interesting points in this data, and what you just said really resonated as well about this data being important for thinking about, excuse me, who's left out and who's missing. But two big points that stood out to me were particularly related to housing and the number of families that were cost burdened in this data. The number was 53%. And cost burden is a term that tells you that the families are paying more than 30% of their income for housing. The HUD, the Housing and Urban Development, sets 30% as what they define as affordable. And so that means inherently that you've got families that are, their resources are constrained and they're struggling. And we know from our research and lots of other researchers that when families' housing is unstable or they're struggling with housing costs, their kids' mental and physical health is at risk, parents' health is at risk, they're more likely to have acute healthcare utilization, and there are lots of costs to the family and to society in the short and long term. So really concerning, but also really important for advocacy for thinking about investing in housing. Sorry, I'm suddenly like losing my voice. And then the other really fast is the point about the advanced child tax credit. It's at the end of the report that 40% of the households below Alice were not getting the advanced CTC. It's higher than we've seen in other data sets so far, but I think it really speaks to who's in this data. And that's, this particular group of families that are either in poverty or are struggling with lower incomes. And those were the ones that were most likely to miss out on the child tax credit. So I think it really speaks to the importance of improving access and the targeting. Like this is the group that really frankly most needs it, and those were the group that were missing out. So I think those 2 points will be really important for us to bring out in our work.
Thanks. Thank you, Stephanie. Next, my pleasure to bring on Laura Speer, who's the Director of Strategy at the Annie Casey Foundation. Stephanie, same question to you. Which data points stand out for you, and how will you use this in your work?
Thank you, Bob. I really appreciate the opportunity to be here and want to thank the United for Alice folks for not only including me on the panel, but just for this work and starting off with the Allison focus on kids. Clearly, Annie Casey Foundation, this is super important for us. So I see this really being a fantastic resource for lots of different reasons and a powerful tool for lots of the things that we work on at the Annie Casey Foundation. And there are several data points that stood out to me, but the one that was the most powerful when I really kind of stepped back and took a minute to think about it is probably the most obvious one, which is just the overwhelming number of families that we're talking about here. It's half of all children growing up in the United States. So you think about that, half of all children growing up in the United States are in households that are economically stretched every single day. And as Stephanie said, that's even more dramatic for kids of color, 7 out of 10 Black and Latino kids, 6 out of 10 American Indian kids. So it's when you think about the stress that those families are under every day and the choices that those parents have to make every single day to keep all the balls up in the air, it was very powerful for me to think about that, and the fact that our social safety net, for the most part, especially for the kids who are living above the poverty line, doesn't really protect these families. It's not, for the most part, not set up to do that. And so these families are really kind of coping on their own with their trying to, kind of grab the resources that they can grab. And so what does this mean for our future workforce and for the country that we have, the country as a whole, given that the opportunities are so limited, we know, for kids growing up in low-income families. And the other thing I'll just quickly say that really struck me was the one data point around the fact that 8 out of 10 children whose parents are a cashier are struggling financially, which seems like kind of a random fact, but when you think about, that's the number 1 job in our economy today. And 8 out of 10 of the kids whose parents are a cashier are in economically stressed households. And I think about also, these are people that we see every single day. The cashiers at the grocery stores, at the coffee shops, at CVS, at, you name it. So it's, to me, very easy to put a real face on the families that we're talking about, because these are people working in jobs that we all depend on and that we all interact with every single day, even if if it's not us, if it's not our families. So I think that this data is really terrific data for us at the Casey Foundation and for other people who care about kids. And it really allows us to tell a very powerful story about the challenges that lots of the families that we interact with every single day deal with to make ends meet.
Thanks, Laura. My other Laura Conklin, who is the Director of Community Health Initiatives at the American Academy of Pediatrics. Laura, same question to you.
Hi, and thank you. I echo everything that Stephanie and Laura has said. I think there's so much great information in this new Allison Focus reports. I will say I do straddle kind of two backgrounds. So I work currently for the American Academy of Pediatrics, and so looking at this data and how do we communicate that with pediatricians to continue their work in their communities, and so kind of that conduit of information and data and support. But I also came from a local health department. I was a director of a local health department in Wisconsin. And so in the past, actually, I used the ALICE reports that we formerly had, the family reports at the county level in Wisconsin. And so used those in a variety of ways. And so it's really exciting to see now the shift to focusing on children. And I think one of the biggest areas that really stood out to me was the SNAP enrollment numbers, because a lot of what we do at the Academy, or what I do at the Academy, is working within the space of social drivers. And so food insecurity is a big one. And I was just struck by the fact that that nationwide, even though all children should be covered by SNAP, the program was utilized by only 60% of children in poverty and a mere 23% of children in ALICE households. So I think there's a lot of things that we can do and ways that we can utilize that information to better support pediatricians in their work with families and with children, to try and connect them to the appropriate resources that they obviously need. So it's really important, and I'm very excited to be able to utilize it and operationalize the data.
Oh, thank you. Thanks, Laura. Stephanie, back to you. As we all know more than ever how important housing is. And as we think about the life chances of children, could you talk a little bit about how thinking about ALICE and housing instability and academic achievement, because I think it's something that sometimes gets too little conversation around. I'd love to hear your thoughts on that.
Yeah, sure. Yeah, I mean, the kids that I tend to focus on in my research with Children's HealthWatch are kids under the 4, so we're not really looking at academic achievement per se, but more sort of like readiness for school.
Yep.
But I do know there is a ton of research related to housing stability and housing quality as well. And two things that I think are really important. One, kids, well, actually three. So like missed school, right? The more unstable your housing is, the more likely it is that you're going to miss school, and that inherently makes it harder to keep up, right?
Yep.
And then there's like the social connections that you miss out on, and with that piece as well. Also, it's related to children's mental health. And I think if the pandemic, we didn't already know it, I mean, I suspect that this group knows it pretty well, but that if we didn't already understand the connection between mental health and being able to do well in school, we learned it in the pandemic. It's an absolutely critical piece of learning. And then, yeah, then just general health as well, which again, if you're not well, it's really hard to concentrate. It's really
Yep.
hard to absorb. So all those things I think are really critical. And then thinking early childhood, you know, our work has demonstrated the connections between housing stability and developmental risk, that kids whose housing is unstable are more likely to be at risk for developmental delays. So I think that's a really critically important piece. But I guess the other thing I do is just broaden it out, because again, I suspect everyone on this webinar knows this, but how interwoven all these needs are. Like, you can't really separate housing from food, from utility costs and healthcare and employment and childcare, all these things. Like, families live those things bound up together. And I think that speaks to what the solutions need to be. We can't address problems in silos. We have to address things holistically, because they just aren't as separate as policies unfortunately are made to be. And I think that's an opportunity too, right? Like, if you want to do cup half full, that's an opportunity as well for agencies to be working together, which I know is always hard. And I don't mean just federal, local, state, federal, but it's so important to know that when I make a decision here, it's going to have an outcome over here. And if we work together, maybe we can have a safety net, to Laura's point, Laura's fear, that like maybe has fewer holes in it, and maybe fewer opportunities for people to fall through the cracks. So at any rate, that's, I guess, what I'd say.
No, thank you, Stephanie. Laura, you made I think a really important point about the families being so economically stretched, and how that really impacts their chances for healthy and constructive adulthoods. And if you could talk a little bit about outside of the school, because we know most kids are in school 180 days a year, but there's a lot of other time they're not in school. And I think as we look at the ALICE data, it gives us some understanding of some of the things that are being missed, but they can't participate in. If you could talk a little about that, I think that'd be really interesting. Laura Speer.
Okay.
I
had a feeling that it was me, but I wasn't for sure.
I mean, Laura, Conklin, you could too, but no, Laura, it was for you. Sorry.
Yeah, well, I think there are a myriad ways that being in an economically stretched household impacts kids.
Yep.
It's and some of them, Stephanie alluded to it, but I think the most obvious for me is just the choices that their parents have to make every single day. Is it do I pay the rent, or do I put gas in my car so that I can take my child to the doctor? Or do I, if my kid is having a hard time in school, do I spend the resources to get, to go to school, take a day off of work to go into school, to talk to the teacher, and to, but it's those trade-offs on so many things that are that end up being, they seem small in some ways, but you realize that those are the things that parents, that we all do for our own kids and the kids in our lives that really can help them when they're stuck, or get them out, get them kind of over those barriers that
Yep.
may seem like kind of small things, but it adds up over time, so that they end up really missing out on opportunities. And one of the things that I think is even when we think about what about their own opportunities when they're old enough to go to get jobs, what are the things that they, how much further behind the 8 ball are they going to be when they're adults? And it feels like there's a real opportunity right now. One of the things that I think it's important to think about, okay, we've all just had a major shock to our collective systems.
Yep.
With the pandemic, and to the labor market, to schools, to the, what are the things that we can do now in the next phase that can help kind of move these kids and these families into places of opportunity. And this is a time, I'm an optimistic person, so I like to think about like what are the opportunities that this terrible last 2 years that we've all suffered through are presenting themselves to do things better.
Thank you. Laura Conklin. This is Laura, right? Laura, so I know that you have some of your expertise is really thinking about community organizations. And one of the things that we know as we come out of the pandemic, how the nonprofit landscape and community-based organization has been in a lot of ways decimated and really hit so hard coming out of the pandemic. And especially in our communities that are non-metropolitan and rural, or even exurban, these communities that don't necessarily have the community-based organizations that have the capacity even to get resources. And would you be able to give some of your thoughts around how this resource will be able to help these community-based organizations to really request the kinds of supports that they need to support their communities?
Yeah, absolutely. That's a great question. I think the more we can arm ourselves with data, right? I think if we think about it from kind of a public health perspective, I mean, data should really drive kind of everything we do. So I would say, and recognizing, of course, that that local health departments, state health departments are still kind of in the midst of the pandemic and still responding, and also dealing with mistrust from the public. So I think that there's an opportunity in some of this hardship that community organizations can really step into, and pediatricians too. I mean, can step into that space and try and assist and help families. I will say one program that we instituted, and I know has been instituted across the United States, it's called Health in All Policies. And so that's really an approach that infuses health, as the title indicates, into everything that happens across a city, a county, a state, whatever. And so I think that there's real opportunity in this data to speak to those families that don't qualify for federal assistance, but can't make it through the month on the finances that they have and the money that they have and they make. And we often found that was the hardest population to really speak about in our community, or in the community that I used to work in. And so the data really helped to bridge that gap. So I would say there's a lot of opportunity in the data that's there. And especially as we talk about like social drivers, I mean, as Stephanie mentioned, nothing happens in a vacuum. Each item and each issue directly correlates to the next one. And so I think, again, there's a lot of opportunity and ways that we can utilize that information.
Thanks, Laura. Now I'd like to go to our third round, and I'd love for each of you to, from your unique perspective, talk about the biggest opportunity to ensure child well-being and equity in the U.S. and what data would help to drive that. Laura Conklin, you want to start? Right back to you.
Right back to me. So I will say, and spoiler, we did get this question ahead of time. And so I've been thinking about this for a week and trying to figure out kind of like what would I say? Because this is such a loaded question and it's such an important topic. So I will say, I think for me, the biggest opportunities lie in ensuring that policymakers and the public really have kind of three main things in mind: the knowledge of the deep and profound inequities for children, the knowledge of the systems in which those inequities are created, and then finally the willingness, need, and resources to really change those systems. I realize this is an extremely utopian view of the issue. But I think, as we've talked about, the pandemic has really highlighted inequities. And I think it's given us an opportunity now to confront and combat the many issues that children face that affect their health and well-being. So it's an opportunity. I will say, as a former health educator, I think we need to use more storytelling in a much more concerted effort and intentional way, no matter what the topic. I mean, really communicating data is only as successful as the emotion elicited from the stories in which that are told. So I would say, in terms of other data that could be, it would be great to get that qualitative data. It's really easy to dismiss a statistic. It's harder to dismiss a family or a child. And so that's kind of what I've been ruminating on for the last week. This is a tough one, so I appreciate the question.
Yeah, and Laura, you're still a health educator, okay?
Yeah, sure, yeah, right.
Stephanie, same question to you from your perspective. What is the biggest opportunity to ensure child well-being and equity and in the U.S., and what data would help with that?
Yeah, well, I think Laura gave a great answer just now. I agree. Really attacking some of the systemic issues is critically important. And to that point, what lies at the base of this, frankly, is a lack of resources for families, right? Like, how did they end up in this Alice category? They don't have resources, they don't have income. And we are frankly behind the rest of the world on this one. Other countries have a child allowance, other countries have some various forms of guaranteed income. And while certainly the targeted resources to particular needs are important and good, what's fundamentally happening is, poor wages and insufficient income support from society in general. So I think that is a really critical thing to bring forward. I agree with the point about storytelling as well, and that marrying that with data. The other thing I think is really important is to not lose sight of the positives as well. And I think that helps bring in more people and like broaden the tent. That, yes, these families are struggling, but my goodness, the admiration I have for people who are, coping through these incredible difficulties and, still, caring for their kids and prioritizing their kids. So I think also bringing forward that strength is a really important piece of this larger story. To that end, I think I'll just throw in a mention of immigrant families. 1 in 4 children in this country have a parent who's an immigrant, at least one parent who's an immigrant. And I feel like they get lost in the conversation a lot, and we forget how much immigrants contribute to this country. And how important it is that we be supporting our next generation of Americans. And so I think that those are some real opportunities. And we have a real opportunity in front of us for big investments in policy change and administrative regulation change right now that would transform the lives of children and families, childcare, housing, and other things that are under discussion. And I think, these data plus, bringing forward again the information about, strengths and contributions, it is an important sort of 1-2 punch for making change.
Thanks, Stephanie. Laura, to you, from your perspective, the opportunity to improve child well-being and equity in the U.S. and what data which you need?
Well, I think Stephanie and Laura hit on I mean, I would reinforce everything they said. I think I would go back to what I said last time around, where I really feel like that this is an opportunity moment for our country around, what's not only the fact that we had these systems kind of took a shock in the last couple of years, but we've also just seen the largest infusion of resources into the social systems in the country since the New Deal. That the recovery funding, the infrastructure funding that's coming from the federal government could potentially be a game changer. The challenge now is that we really have to take advantage of that opportunity. That local cities, governments, states, people, local communities need to take the opportunity to transform the systems, which is not an easy task in any way, shape, or form. But I think we can't rely on this like we don't have the resources to do it excuse right now in this moment. However, it's the clock is ticking on those dollars, and many places are struggling to figure out how to do it. And I think the local United Ways certainly could be a resource to help lift up programs that are working, and to work with local governments to help get that funding into the right place. There's an opportunity to transform schools. There's lots of money going into local school systems, to rebuild the childcare systems, to take another look at post-secondary opportunities that can be available to any young person who wants to and is able to go to school and take care of that. And also the labor market. What's going on with the labor market right now? Part of as Stephanie said, folks are in the Alice category because they're not making enough money in their jobs. We're seeing a real need for increased wages for everybody, not just those who are highly educated. Folks cannot fill job openings, and in part that has to do with the fact that the wages are just not high enough for people to make the choice, especially if you have kids and you have to figure out how to get them to childcare, and those are difficult choices to make. So I think there is a real opportunity in this moment. I think one of the things I wanted to be sure to say is that that folks who are on this call from the United Ways across the country, as far as the data goes, telling the local data story is really important. And the United for Alice data does include local data. So you have the ability to go and tell the story of what's happening with data in your local communities using this. And I really, we've done Kids Count at the Casey Foundation for 30 years. And what makes it powerful is the local data and the local advocates who use that data and get it in front of the people who can make a difference. So I would definitely encourage folks on this call to use that and to tell stories about what's happening in your community, both kind of the families that need it, but also things that are working. What are the telling that we have to be able to tell the story about solutions with the same amount of power that we tell the story about need. So you all, I think in United Ways are uniquely positioned to be able to do that.
Thanks, Laura. I love that we have to tell the same story about solutions that we tell about our need. And with that, I'm going to turn to my colleague, Catherine Conklin, for questions. And yeah, I think we have some good questions about probably rolled, and it's been a great conversation thus far. Catherine, you're on mute.
Thank you. Thanks, Bob. Thanks, Bob. And I just want to say thank you to the panelists also. This has been such an insightful and stimulating conversation. We have lots of great questions coming in from attendees. And so the one I'd like to start off with first, we've had a lot of conversation around the stress that families are under right now. So how do we strengthen positive parent-child connections at a time when parents are so economically stressed and short on time. So any of the panelists want to take that question?
I can jump in, and then if others have thoughts, certainly add. I mean, I think about Maslow's hierarchy of needs. I don't know if anybody knows about that, but like meeting people's needs, like if you're hungry, if you're struggling with housing and utilities and all these things, like it's just really hard to be patient and really hard to find a way to breathe. And so I think the work that United Ways do of helping to connect people to resources is absolutely critical, because there is this flow then to parents' mental health and thus their ability to be the parents they want to be. I would say too, that I think that is some of what's coming through so clearly with all the research that's coming out around the child tax credit, including our own. We have a study that's underway right now. And some of the things that people have been telling us is, you know, the child tax credit, the monthly advanced child tax credit allowed them to breathe, was a cushion, helped them to, you know, buy a key thing that their kid needed, and, you know, bring some joy into their lives apart from paying for bills and like relieving stress that way. So I feel like where people can, you know, advocate, where people can bring those stories forward, I think that's really essential to making change, and to allowing families to be less stressed.
I could just add one piece to what Stephanie said. I think what she said is right on target, that you know, just relieving some of the stress that parents are under is important. But we've also been one of the areas that we've invested in for a number of years is this idea around 2-generation strategies in lots of different ways. And because there's a real opportunity to improve the lives both of the child and the parent at the same time, in education strategies, in, you know, developing positive parenting skills, all kinds of things. And this is especially important for young parents. So I know that there are lots of programs out there, that United Ways support across the country. I think those are really good opportunities to both kind of help build parent skills in, you know, even job training programs that take into account the fact that these people who are trying to get jobs are parents. And so what does that mean for, you know, could there be a child care component added to a job training program, or thinking about school completion for a young person or a person who's like in community college, so that there are wraparound services in community colleges for parents and including their children. So those kinds of things I think can really be powerful, both in helping to advance the economic security of the family, but also building that kind of parent-child relationship in a positive way.
And if I can just add very quickly, this is a space that the Academy has been working in for some time. And so wanting to just put it out there that pediatricians are a partner in this space, and you know, certainly can assist parents in helping to connect, you know, to resources or for a sounding board, or you know, a way in which to figure out kind of how to move forward. So I wanted to put that out there, that that, you know, your local pediatrician, your kid's pediatrician is also a partner in this space.
No, I think that's really important, Laura. I'm glad that you brought up the importance of pediatricians in that. Of course, I have to put a plug in for school nurses as well, as being, you know, just these, and we found, you know, so important. I mean, as we move through the pandemic, how important school nurses are as well. Catherine, do you have another question for our panelists?
Yeah, yes, I do actually. We've had quite a few questions around policy. I know you've touched on a little bit of that during our conversation, but there seems to be more that needs to be done at the local level. Helping politicians understand all about low wages. And Alice, does the panel have any insights into what is happening in policy at the local area and how we can work together with our local politicians to drive change together?
Well, there's probably this could be a whole other like 3-hour conversation, I'm sure, but folks, I'm sure we're getting close to our time. So, but one thing I would say is that for United Ways, especially because you all are experts on getting money out the door to community organizations, trying to provide help to local government to take advantage of the American Rescue Plan dollars before time is up. I mean, that's it. I know that there are some United Ways that are really partnering really closely with their local jurisdictions. The money that's coming. I know I keep saying it, but the money that's come from the federal government outweighs anything that philanthropic dollars would ever be able to do. So it's really important that we don't let this opportunity pass us by, and that we get those dollars to the organizations that are going to really make a difference. So I would just kind of I know that that's not one particular policy, but it's really about implementation of an opportunity that we really can't let slip.
I can just add as well. I too, in addition to that, would say that this is an excellent opportunity. I think health, especially children's health, especially mental health, the social drivers, I mean, that is top of mind for a lot of people. When I was a health officer, I would have to describe what any of that was. And I feel like now, perhaps policymakers, decision makers at the local level, they're coming in with a level of knowledge now and a level of understanding that these are issues that are large and need to be addressed. So I will say there is, I don't have specifics, but this is an opportunity to kind of take what's happened and really continue to communicate and try to move the needle at the local level on a lot of these issues.
Yeah, I mean, I think everything that has been said is incredibly important. I don't want to repeat. So yes to all of that. And I think, again, just to keep hammering the same thing, that pairing of local data together, and the ways, not just what the problems are, but again, that solutions are within reach. Like here is a program that is attacking this issue, whatever this issue is. I think that's really important for people to hear, not just at the local level, that not just like, here's a problem, but here's also what we think could be done about it, or here's a solution that's kind of working, but if it had like this other piece to it, work even better, like which I imagine people are already doing. But I do think, again, like bringing these data in and the story about what more could be done to change the data and make it a better picture and make lives better would be really powerful.
Thanks, Stephanie. Catherine, do you have another question for our panelists?
Yeah, I think we could just sort of close out with that. The top of right before we started the panel, we did have a poll that asked the attendees if they could invest in one area, where do they think would have the biggest impact for Alice children and families? And the choices were food, education, housing, health, and childcare, and environment. And so the two with the biggest response was first housing and then childcare. And we didn't really get to talk too much today about the environment. There was one question about that in the chat as well. How can we ensure that we're addressing some of the climate crisis issues in our communities and how that's impacting children. So I don't know if you have any experience or expertise in any of those areas, but we have final words on any of those, either housing or childcare or climate crisis. Do you want to touch on any of that as we close out?
Well, I think they're all interrelated. I mean, they are, right? Like, right. I mean, where do we know folks who are lower income live. Generally places that have less green space, less tree cover, you know, more concrete, more exposure to pollutants and things like that. And my team and I have done some work looking at the intersections of material hardships like food insecurity and like air pollution and all these things, and they have a synergistically bad effect on kids' growth and health. And you know, it's also an equity issue, right? Like there's a really great and really disturbing study that came out around tree cover and how neighborhoods of color have less tree cover than white neighborhoods. Well, that's a problem. And it absolutely relates to people's well-being, their mental health, all those things. So, and childcare is right in there. Like people's ability to afford housing has to do with what wages they get and how their work situation, and families with kids can't work if they don't have childcare. We learned that in the pandemic if we never knew that before. So anyway, I think they're very much interrelated issues.
Thanks, Stephanie.
No, Stephanie, I'm glad that you brought up the tree cover and the issue of thinking about access to parks and playgrounds, because we know how important that is, especially as we saw in the pandemic when people couldn't really meet inside, and the opportunity for them to gather and congregate in parks and playgrounds. And then even this whole idea of biophilia, that the opportunity to walk in nature, and how important we're learning that is to health and well-being. And again, coming back to the pandemic, we know the behavioral health issue. It's just something that wasn't really available. And I think getting back to Laura's point about equity, this opportunity idea of the opportunity, the opportunity to walk in nature, that's an opportunity that we take for granted so often. So I'm really glad that you brought up that, because I do think it's so interconnected and related.
One last just plug I'd put in on the climate. That's not an issue that the Annie Casey Foundation does a lot of work on. However, it's an issue that really motivates young people. That there are, if I would just encourage folks to turn to young leaders, young people to come up with solutions around climate, local solutions. It's, we've heard it over and over again from young people that we talk to, that this is an area that they want to try to do something about. They feel like they're the ones that are going to have to deal with the repercussions more than we as adults in our generation, and they really are highly motivated to act on it. So I would just encourage folks to look at in your local communities to young people to help develop solutions in this area.
Well, I think we are almost at the end of the time, and I know that we are going to, for those of you that can stick around, there's Ashley Anglin will be giving a tour of the website, but I hope you'll join me in thanking our panelists. They were excellent. It was a great conversation. I threw you guys some curveballs, I realized, but you answered them great. And it was really fun getting to see three of you and this conversation. And I'm just, I hope our paths cross in the near future.
Likewise. Thank you.
Thank you so much for having me here. It's a great conversation.
Great job.
Thank you.
Great.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye.
Thanks, everyone. So for everyone who is able and interested to stay on for a brief tour of the website, I'll be doing this now, but this does conclude the formal part of the presentation. So if you need to hop, no worries. We want to keep and be respectful of everybody's time. But one of the key features of this data release is really our online database and the dashboards that all of our partners, all of you, that's publicly available now for everyone to kind of interact with directly on our website. This really puts the ALICE data in your hands to be able to look at the variables and the geographies that matter most to you. And this is also where you can download some of our key downloads, including the National Research Brief, which talks about kind of all of the key issues that we've addressed here on this launch event, and many more. There's over 50 different variables that we're looking at here. State research briefs, a state comparison of some of our key indicators, which allows you to compare for all states across the country some of those key variables, as well as a data dictionary. There were some questions in the chat about kind of the data set and which variables are included. You can find all of that information here in that data dictionary. But kind of the main event online is our ALICE Children Data Dashboard. And this is where you can look at the number and percentage of children who were in households below the federal poverty level, who had income above the federal poverty level, but below what is needed to afford the basic cost of expenses in their communities, and those who have income above the cost of the basics, those that are above the ALICE threshold. And throughout this dashboard and in our presentations, children below the ALICE threshold include both those in poverty and those in ALICE households. This tool allows you to look at across the US at the national level, or for any of our ALICE partner states, variables related to these categories, including age, race, ethnicity, nativity and language, disability status, living arrangements, household work, housing, education, health insurance, home internet, and public assistance. For any of these categories that you have selected, you can see the bar chart below that shows the breakout for the variables in that group. So for example, here you can see some of the things that Stephanie highlighted at the beginning of the presentation around the percentage of all children that are in poverty, 16%, those that are ALICE, 33%, and then above the ALICE threshold. You can also see the breakdown by age, or you can select any of these different variables to see the data broken down by category. So including here, you can see race, ethnicity. Another example here around living arrangements, and really seeing the variation in financial hardship depending on the household composition. So for example, here you can see a really high percentage of children below the ALICE threshold in households that are single female headed, and the lowest rates in those that are in married couple households. You can also see some data around grandparents and grandchildren. Household work is another place where you see a lot of variation that you can interact with here, and seeing how, depending on the workers in the household, how many workers are available and how many of them are working, how that really impacts the financial stability of children that live in those households. There's also some variables around health insurance, education, home internet, and public assistance. So really the some of the resources that ALICE children don't have, or have at less extent than other children in other households. Below any of these bar charts, you can also see the breakdown and the numbers. And this is important for those of you who want to do your own calculations, or look and see kind of the breakdown for above ALICE, ALICE, and poverty for any of the variables that you have selected. In our second dashboard tool, you can combine categories. You can cross-tabulate categories. So for example, you can look at school-age children who are Black and who have a disability, for example. So you can do this for the US or for partner states. Also go to a partner state to give an example. And you'll be able to see how the pie charts differ and how the percentages differ based on what selections you make. So for example, here, I'm going to select children who are Hispanic with a disability, and you can see how the chart changes. There are also a lot of questions about the local data, how, while this is at the state and national level, you can also dig down using our local maps tab. With this tool, you're going to see first the full US. Here you can see just kind of at a glance the variation in the percentage of children who are below the ALICE threshold by state, ranging from 33% here in, let's see, North Dakota, up to 57% in Louisiana. And so you can see that variation across states. But for our ALICE partner states, you can also dig a little deeper into a geography that we call PUMAs. PUMAs are public use microdata areas, and they're census designated areas of about 100,000 people. And so what that means, in some areas that are more rural or the population isn't as dense, they cover larger areas. So for example, here in New York, this PUMA covers 4 counties, or here a county. But as you get into more densely populated areas closer to New York City, you can see that these PUMAs start to represent neighborhoods. And so for in more urban areas, you'll be able to see kind of at a smaller level what that looks like and the percentage there. When you have a state selected, you can also dig deeper into these different categories. So all of the categories that I just showed on the other dashboard are also here in the local maps tab. So for example, if you wanted to look at nativity and language, for example, you could select then a subcategory. That's an important note here. You'll see this pop up. The map disappears until you get a subcategory. It needs to know what you're looking at exactly. So we'll look here at children who are born outside of the US. And you can see for, depending on where you are, there may be too few children to show that variable. And so that's another thing I wanted to point out here, that any areas with 500 or fewer children are suppressed to maintain accuracy and confidentiality. But if you select born inside the US, you can see the data populate there. And again, below each map, you can see the raw numbers for each of these particular geographies, each of these PUMAs. So you can do that for all of these different areas and also all of these different locations. You can use the how to use this tool feature if you have questions about how to use the different dashboards. And below this on both pages, you can also see some technical details around the sourcing, and categories, as well as another link to the data dictionary. Scrolling up and also on this page, you can access our state briefs and sponsors. This page is where you can access the information for those partner states by selecting the name of the state. You have a link here to download the research brief for that state. We have also links to our partner organizations within those states as well as their sponsors. So you can use this drop down for to access that information as well. In addition, we have the committees that help make this work possible. Stephanie shared those at the beginning here, but if you would like more information about our Allison Focus National Leadership Committee for Children or our Allison Focus National Research Advisory Committee for Children, those names and affiliations are listed here. And just a moment to say a big thank you to those partners for being involved in this work and helping us bring this data to all of you today. And then last but not least, we also have some resources. So we know that this data set that we're sharing here today is really just one piece of the puzzle in understanding children in financial hardship. There's a lot of other wonderful, important, great work going on that puts additional context behind this and really helps paint that picture to help us really understand what challenges and opportunities there are related to children. And so you can explore these additional resources by topic, including by disability status, race, ethnicity, education, health. Just click on one of the categories and to see the resources below. If you would like to hear this tour again, basically, this video here is a dashboard overview as well that you're welcome to share out with other partners. It's a great way to kind of get people using it, help get people comfortable with the dashboards and everything there. So I'm going to pause and see if there, maybe Catherine, if there's any questions that came in while I was doing this tour.
Yeah, actually, there's one question about data available for other age groups, such as seniors, where they can find that.
Yeah, so this data set is focused specifically on children. And so what you're going to see in this, for this data release is all of the numbers and percentages that are included in the dashboard are numbers and percentages of children themselves. Those children are compared to their household composition and their household, which makes up their household budget. So just a little methodology note, the way we determine if a child is above or below the ALICE threshold is we look at the household that they live in. When we compare the income of that household to the local cost of living where they live. So the cost of the basics like housing, food, transportation, childcare, et cetera. However, we also do have in a different data release where we look at households data for different age groups, not just or households that are headed by seniors. So not just one particular person. You can find more in our research center here. Where if you select our partner states, there are some additional dashboards that look at households. Again, different from this, it's looking at individuals, but with those households, you can look at differences in financial hardship for households headed by a senior or by a single adult, et cetera. And what we do see nationwide that seniors tend to be less likely than the general population to be below the federal poverty level, but they're often more likely to be ALIS. So we know that supports for seniors like Social Security, Medicaid, help cover some of those basics to keep a lot of some seniors that would otherwise be, below the federal poverty level, but isn't enough to bring them to financial stability.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, one more question, Ashley, where you can find the county level data. So would you want to show where the county profile pages are for?
Oh, sure. Yeah. So for this particular data release, all of the children data, the 2019 children data is going to be here on this local maps tab. But if you're looking for household level data, which at this point is 2018 or 2019, depending on the state, you can find those again in the research center. So I can show you that here for one of our partner states as well. These are two different data sets. They're both from the Census Bureau, but just an important note that this data, kind of what we had called our traditional ALIS measures, are again focusing at the household level, while ALIS in Focus is really looking at individuals. So they're not directly comparable in that way, but you can look at, for example, county profile data to find the household level information for our ALIS partner states. And so on these tools, you can select a particular county and see the data below to look at that. And that also includes some data about change over time in the number of ALIS households, as well as differences by household composition and the specific budgets for that county, the budgets here that's based on. And there is sub-county data available for this data set as well, but you can, and that's what you can get here on these county profile tabs. So there's a lot of different tools and resources to explore on our site. ALIS in Focus Children is our newest and most exciting, well, at least because it's new, data set to bring to our partners. But yeah, thanks, Catherine, for reminding us that there is that additional household level data. And you can also on our website see some of our new tools and resources around COVID-19 and ALIS. We have a new legislative district tool that looks at ALIS households by legislative district, and an ALIS wage tool that compares wages and local cost of living that you can explore there too. So there's lots to do on the website. So we encourage you to come play around, try it out. And if you ever have questions as you're working around on the site or looking for things, you can always contact us with the contact us form that's here on the site, or email us at info@unitedforalis.org. Any other questions?
Yeah, there's one more here. Is the data adjusted in any way to account for the fact that the census drastically undercounted by PAC folks? Can we assume these disparities are worse than what's shown in the data?
Yeah, so there definitely is some undersampling that's done that has been documented for, by race ethnicity, but also other factors. And so we know that in some ways it might be an undercount. And so, advocating for more accurate collection of data that came up in the Q&A as well, something that we're very invested in and wanting to make sure that we can get the best data from the census, but we really rely on those publicly available data sources without adjustment so that we can be transparent about the methodology, that it's replicable, that it's using those public sources with our unique methodology. And so, so this is, take with that in mind. Also, children with disabilities we know aren't traditionally undercounted, as well as children living without their parents. And so there's definitely a lot of groups that are, for various reasons, we know that there's some systemic undercounting. And so in a lot of cases, you could assume that there's probably a greater disparity than is even shown.
I think this is the final one. Any plans to include additional states that are not listed here on the website?
Yeah, so we're always looking for new partners in other states. And the way that our model works is we really want to have that local touch and that connection to those states. And so we bring data to the states when we have local sponsors who are able to help support that work for that state, but also to really be the ambassadors of that work. We are definitely open and willing and always interested to expand this. It's a growing movement. We're getting new states, it seems like very often, and hopefully that'll continue to happen. So if you are interested in learning more about bringing ALIS to your state, if you're not included here, Again, you can reach out to info@unitedforalice.org and we can have that conversation. But yeah, we've really learned that having that ability to have those local networks in states is really what helps disseminate this research. And so not only can we provide the data to our partners, but part of that partnership package is also all of the supports around telling the story and helping get our research advisory committees for those states set up. There's a lot that goes on behind the scenes there to make that possible. So we're looking for those local connections and partnerships to really expand this movement and to bring ALICE to more states. Any other questions come up? Okay, well, thank you so much. We're going to sign off now. We really appreciate all of you for being here. For those of you that stayed on, thanks for your extra attention today, and really appreciate all that you are doing to make a difference for ALICE in your communities, all that you're doing now, and hopefully all that you can do even better with this data in your hands. So thanks again. We appreciate it.